all, hearty congratulations on a wonderful book, a very, very people-centric book. You've touched lives.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with something that you have said in your book. In your preface, you write, "In my adult life, I have never been more concerned about the direction our leaders are taking us than I am today." I'd like you to elaborate on that.
Well, look, I have been in some ways connected with both the international policy dialogue as well as domestic policy dialogue in India for the last 20 years or so, and of course been an observer for 15 to 20 years before that. And I have to say that the kind of political dysfunction, or dysfunction is the wrong word, sometimes it's dysfunction, sometimes it is conflict, that you see across the world is very worrisome. And what I try and do in the book is try and understand why we are seeing this level of conflict. And to my mind, conflict often signals something deeper that underlying that is problematic. And you know, to some extent, the book outlines for the reader why we are where we are and what we need to do to get away from here. When I say concern, it has two or three components to it. One, I'm not sure we are at all addressing the deeper sources of the problem, and they will only grow. Second, the pathways we are taking sometimes are very short-term and myopic, and will in fact make problems worse for everyone rather than solve those problems. And third, because various countries are moving in this direction, there is the possibility of not just trade wars, but even cold or hot wars. And that has me absolutely concerned. So we're not fixing the short term, we're not fixing the long term, and we're moving in the wrong direction.
So before I get back to the book, there is one review I read on your website. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This journalist, Edward Glazer, he says, your decision to champion country craft fairs, etc., because is all the more compelling because it is unexpected. Is it really unexpected?
Well, by the way, Ed Glazer is a professor at Harvard University of economics. So he just happens to be the occasional reviewer and therefore a journalist. But he's a full chaired professor at Harvard. And I think unexpected because the areas I work with are more finance, and of course in my applied economist life, I've been the chief economist at the IMF, which means macroeconomics, and of course as central bank governor, again monetary policy, macroeconomics. So to go from there to really talk about country fairs, as he puts it, the community, is really a big leap. And his question, his expressing some surprise, but he is in the camp that thinks this is a very useful exercise.
Are you surprised that you decided on it? What
No,
was
look.
the trigger, if I may ask?
Look, I see myself as a practical economist. I want to go where I think the theories and the data lead me. And to some extent, this book is sort of saying we don't have solutions at the macro level. And they're not, whatever we're trying doesn't seem to be working. Should we be looking elsewhere? And that's where I sort of focus on this idea of the community as being where the problems are emerging from, and therefore the community as being much the source of answers. Macro policy, lowering interest rates, fiscal stimulus, that can leave entire communities untouched. if I'm a community ridden with crime and you reduce interest rates, that doesn't mean anybody will come and invest here, because the real problem is crime. So no matter how brave the company and no matter how low the interest rate, they're not going to come. And so my first order of business, if I want to revive the community as a community worker, is to solve the crime problem, to reduce crime. And that's not something that can be done in Delhi or Washington. It has to be done locally. And again and again, there are many solutions which require local knowledge and a local sense of this is the next thing that needs to be done. And so the book is really trying to focus on some of these and saying maybe we have been looking too macro. How do we empower the community, get it adequate funding in order to do what it has to do?
Sir, you have spoken a lot about populist nationalism. You have said that this will underline the liberal market democratic system that has brought developed countries the prosperity we have. Could we illustrate or estimate the kind of damage that it can do?
Well, so in the book, I talk about populism as having healthy elements to it, because it raises the right questions. Populism is often a revolt against the elite. It's saying, we the people think you're not doing enough for us. And so because it raises the right questions, I think there's an element of value to those kinds of movements. My worry is that they sometimes take the wrong direction and are often supported by people who are very disgusted with the existing system because they feel the elites, in the case of populist nationalism, the elites support too many migrants, they support too many minorities. They're not really looking out for the majority community. That's what populist nationalism is about. There are other forms of populism we can go into, but the broader point I'm trying to make is that the problem with populist nationalism is it may sort of certainly highlight the problems with elite policies, which I think is not a bad thing, but its solutions often involve fairly protectionist or narrow policies. We're going to help the majority by removing any protection the minority has. We're going to try and stop migrants from ever coming in. We're going to erect trade barriers against other countries. And it seems to me these are very myopic solutions and don't lend to a long-term sustainable answer.
So you have written a lot about the aspirational young when you talk in terms of the kind of education they are looking for, especially from the emerging markets, the developed countries, and how not getting that education is leading to a lot of frustration and a dysfunctional system. In India, we have this right to education. Do you think in India we have made any progress towards, to get from the point A that we were to?
Well,
what is good?
I am not an expert in education, but from what I understand about the right to education bill, I mean, on the one hand, I think as far as education more broadly goes in India, we've made progress in everybody gets into school at an early age. The problem is they don't stay in school. And it may well be that elements of our educational policy are contributing to that. Because kids, need to be at a level commensurate with the class's level if they are to continue learning. Because the teacher is teaching to the level in the class. If a child falls behind, but is promoted regardless, the child is not only going to be unable to understand the material for the previous class, but for the next class, they are totally unprepared also, because they weren't, they really didn't absorb the material earlier. So the level of incomprehension of the child will just continue to increase, because if I didn't understand 5th grade stuff and I'm promoted to 6th grade, I'm even less likely to understand, and it may well be that by the time I reach 7th grade or 8th grade, I'm still at 5th grade level. One of the elements of our policy today is no holding children back. The way that works is only if you offer significant remedial education for the children who are weak, so that they come up to class level, for example, during the summer break. If you don't do that, and if you can't bring them up to class level, what you're ensuring is they fall further and further behind. And I think some of the evidence from the Pratham or Asar surveys suggest our children are not doing well. Many of them in 8th grade don't read at 4th or 5th grade level. They can't do math at 3rd grade level. That our system is not working well. And we need to really think about, how much of this is because of our current policies, for example, of not holding any children back, or of not providing adequate remedial education to the ones who are not doing well.
Sir, you have, your recurring theme in this book is also populist nationalism. I want to know whether, it's a question you have raised also, will they retract from their mission of building the kind of country or society they want, that they imagine?
Well, I think that that path, if taken, is very dangerous for the world, because it is not a path that fosters significant dialogue between countries, and within country creates the possibility of social conflict. So I would hope that it's a path that actually can be pushed back, that we can contain the impulse for populist nationalism and make it a much more decent populist nationalism, if you want to go there, but not the kind of aggressive populist nationalism that we see. For that, I think we need an understanding of why it emerges, and a pushback by the other forces, a pushback by essentially dealing with the causes of populist nationalism at its roots. And that is why much of the book is about trying to explain why we get to these kinds of situations. What is it about our economies that push us into a politics of anger? And how do we alleviate that politics?
So you have spoken about getting back to, I would say, our roots, the community, strengthening the community. You have said from global to local, national to regional to local. How will that journey pan out for a country like India?
Well, I think we are already in the process. Now, let me put it differently. In colonial times, because we were ruled by a small group of Englishmen from Delhi, essentially there was a lot more centralization. And I think we continued that over the first few years of the Republic. I think since the early 1990s, we have thought, well, we have centralized too much. Let us decentralize so that people feel more of a sense of control and they can actually do things. So we started with Panchayati Raj, but there's still some way to go. Many of our municipalities, many of our mayorships don't have enough power. They almost are ceremonial positions. Some of our panchayats are not empowered with a lot of funding. So, fine, you can elect the sarpanch, but the sarpanch doesn't have much to do to affect the lives of people. They don't have control over the local school. They don't have control over the local primary health center. So what we need to think about is how we can empower people more, give them a sense of engagement so that they can address their problems. And that's why I say empower the community more by pushing down power and functions from the national to the regional to the local.
Sir, there is one point you make which I find a little scary. This is on page 324.
You got there, yes.
How will we pay?
Yeah.
You know, it's on government debt. And it reminds me of your earlier book where you turned out so right. And if this were to turn out right, which I'm sure it will, given you're the author, it would be very scary.
Well, so there I raise...
Is that only in the American context? Or?
It's actually in the context of the developed countries. One of the aspects I try and emphasize in the book is that we need to understand history, how we got here, to understand what the problems are. And one of the aspects of how the West got to where they are is in the very prosperous 1960s. They promised themselves huge, a very strong safety net, huge pension payments when they got old, early retirement, a strong healthcare facility for the elderly. And the problem was soon after they promised all that in the 1960s, when growth was very healthy, growth suddenly died. And now they had a twin problem: slow growth not generating enough income to pay for all these entitlements that had been created. At the same time, these populations were aging. So what we've seen since then is that debt has steadily increased in these countries because they really have slowed, they don't have the ability to pay, and debt has increased. The problem, of course, is looking ahead. Unless they have significant immigration and reduce the age of their population, this is a path that is not going to turn around. And so that's the worry, that the debt levels in these countries is just quite huge. And they rely on the rest of the world to continue buying their debt. But at some point, the debt becomes too much. Sorry.
Sir, in the Indian context, now we'll never get to that kind of safety net, but still political parties are talking about providing some kind of safety net that is proportionate to our resources and all that. Do you see us heading in that kind of a direction?
Well, it is something we have to be conscious of and to avoid. That's why it seems to me that costing out the kind of promises we make to see whether the benefits in the longer run will outweigh the costs and whether we can pay for it is extremely important. Now, to some extent, when we make income transfers to a particular segment of the population, the hope is that you give them enough of a support that they come out of whatever situation they're in, whether it's poverty or agricultural distress, and they can start generating sufficient income down the line. Now, that kind of idea, if that works, could pay for itself. But if in the longer run they don't come out, they don't become fully productive citizens, but then continue absorbing these kinds of flows, then you have to worry whether in fact you have this overburdened fiscal system, and which creates problems down the line. So every kind of fiscal support you give should be assessed for whether this is long run sustainable. And again, to the extent that improves the capabilities of the targets, they may eventually earn enough income to repay some of this support and more. It's a good thing then. But to the extent that they can't, you have to ask yourself, you know, can we afford this in the longer run?
This worry would be more given election time in India and...
Well, so, I mean, this goes back to the kinds of promises we make and the degree to which we scrutinize them. So what is important, I think, going forward is we have a kind of fiscal commission.
Fiscal commission.
Yeah, fiscal commission of outsiders, outsiders to the government, who opine on the policies the government is proposing. You know, this pension scheme, that transfer scheme, something else. It looks at the costing of all these, and then looks at the revenues you're raising and looks at these both over the long term and says, is this feasible, is this viable? And to the extent that the fiscal commission doesn't think it's viable, it puts pressure on the government to rectify things. That's a good thing. That would keep us from getting into trouble because we have made promises that we simply can't keep.
So for some years we used to hear, and even when you were here at the RBI, about India being a sweet spot. I haven't heard it in some time.
One of the surveys I saw recently by Professor Trilochan Shastri at IIM Bangalore and a colleague of his, Pratik Raj, who used to be at the University of Chicago and I've talked a lot with, is on 2.7 lakh voters going into these elections, asking them, what are your major concerns? And you know what the number one concern is? It is jobs. Are the jobs, they're likely to be jobs for us, good jobs. And when you say we aren't hearing about the population dividend is a dividend only if the people coming into the workforce can get jobs. And if this anxiety reflects the difficulty of getting jobs, then the dividend at best is neutral and at worst can turn into a curse, because what you have is you know, people who can't get jobs essentially you know, getting angry.
So you addressed you were the first one, in fact, to flag the issue of the twin balance, you know, the NPAs and...
Well, I would say Arvind Subramaniam has been highlighting that, you know, more than I have. I mean, what we did at the RBI was try to start the process of cleaning up this twin balance sheet problem, by at least cleaning up the bank balance sheet, but also trying to restore the corporate balance sheet to some kind of health. But this is an ongoing cleanup process.
Did you expect it to take a long time?
Well, I knew it had to be done. I would have loved to do it in the shortest time possible.
Sir, you're 2.5 years away from where you were as governor. How do you look at the relationship that the RBI has had with the government?
I think the details, the inside details of the relationship are very important to understand what the true relationship is. Often I used to read about the purported relationship we had in the papers, but that didn't reflect the true relationship. There's a lot of back channel talk, etc. However, I think the sense that has emerged in the markets, and again, I don't want to say this is right or wrong, is there has been some conflict. Now, conflict is always built into the system to some extent. That's the nature of the RBI government relationship, simply because the RBI has a mandate which is given by the government, which occasionally means saying no to the government. We can't do this or we can't do that because it involves more risk than we feel comfortable with. And the government in its wisdom typically accepts that. Now it's when they disagree about that, but with the government, which is the more powerful entity, not agreeing to disagree, then you get stronger conflict.
So, whatever right-wing populist nationalism we have in our country, as we have seen through anecdotal evidence, little incidents here and there, odd statements and all that, how damaging would those be to the the corporate sector, to the markets?
Look, I think that
Beyond the Sensex.
low-level conflict can be handled, and I wouldn't worry too much about low-level conflict. We're a country which has always had some low-level issues in different states at different times. What could be more worrisome is very strong movements, mass movements, to achieve a particular goal. Let's try and ease these people out of their positions. Let's keep the jobs for those people. Let's erect strong barriers against any kind of inflow of goods through trade. I mean, if you take more dramatic action because you feel that you have the mandate, then from the people, then we could get into more severe problems. But otherwise, I think it's handleable.
So you also write about this tariffs, the trade wars between US and China. How the Indian right-wing lot could respond to that and do more damage in a country like ours? I would like you to elaborate that.
No, look, I think that it's not so much that it's that nationalism, populist nationalism in one country feeds populist nationalism in the other. When one country is saying we're going to erect barriers because we want to make our country great, the sort of target countries start saying, why are we being so open? Those guys are closing down their markets. Why don't we close down our markets also? So protectionism feeds on itself. That's the sense in which I was arguing that some kind of trade war where sides erect barriers against each other could create longer-term problems for everyone, including quote-unquote innocent bystanders. But India's, sometimes innocent, sometimes not always innocent, because India has had protectionist tendencies in the past, and every once in a while succumbs to these protectionist tendencies.
Now they have a lot of power over government, or so it's believed. Would you worry that with that kind of, majoritarian view, they can, say, cause further imbalance to the, lack of balance that you are addressing in this book?
Look, I mean, the RSS is one example of a populist nationalist organization. And since the book is largely against the aims of the populist nationalist organizations, I think that the RSS counts as one of the problems. I mean, there are good people in every organization. So before I talk about the problems, let me say there have been very, very honorable and praiseworthy members, such as Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Bharat Ratna, and a very decent human being as well as a great leader. But that said, as the organizational aim, and why I dispute that organizational aim, it is imposing a sort of a view on everyone else, which is much narrower than the kind of broad syncretic country that we have become, and which to my mind runs counter to the view of India as embedded in the views of our founding fathers like Nehru and Gandhi, as well as the Constitution. So to that extent, I believe it's a much narrower view, and because it's a narrower view, it doesn't give as much freedom of participation in the broad stream of Indian life to a variety of communities outside the majoritarian community, and others that it considers part of the majority community. And that, to my mind, is deeply problematic for an open democratic country like ours. We cannot afford it. And so, so long as they don't fulfill their aims, that's fine. But they're a very powerful organization, and they work towards fulfilling their aims. So I dispute that aim.
Sir, again, elections. Do you think the Indian voter, who has been held very high because of the way we've been able to change governments, would be able to distinguish between this kind of, the RSS kind of view and the impact it can have on society?
I think
versus their other development agenda.
I think the voter is far smarter than we give the voter credit for, and they understand where, as you said, there is a good development agenda of some of these organizations also, and some good nationalistic work in times of calamity. They come out and help and so on. That's, to my mind, the very notable and praiseworthy aspects of the agenda. But when the other side, the more divisive side, takes over, the voter knows that this is the downside, and can react to that.
Sir, again, while on the thing, today it was in the newspapers all over, this electoral bonds. Now they are bonds, and so I think the RBI would have some kind of an oversight over the bonds also. How do you look at it?
So, I mean, there are multiple aspects to it. There's a safety and soundness aspect that there's no reason to believe that once the money has gone in, it's just a way of transferring money from a donor to the political party. So there's no safety and soundness, it seems to me, embedded in that bond. The second issue for somebody like the RBI is one of, do I know whether this is clean money or not? And there, because of the murkiness of the origins, I mean, I think the bank is supposed to do the bank that gets the money is supposed to do some check. And what I'm not sure about is whether there's enough check that the money is relatively clean money as opposed to not so clean money. I think there are checks in place, but I'm not familiar with it, so let me put that as a caveat. That is something that needs to be examined. But where I understand the Election Commission is unhappy is that it reduces the transparency of the funding process. You have no idea who is giving it to the entity, to the party receiving it. And a lot of election is about transparency. Do I know who's paying that party? Because then I know what are the interests behind it, and I can make an informed sort of decision as a voter. Do I support those interests or do I not? And what this non-transparency about who gave the money will do is it essentially makes the funding much less clear. So I would take the Election Commission's objections seriously and see if in fact they're important.
So when you were governor of the RBI, did the issue of election funding come up in any way?
Well, I mean, what we used to see is a lot more cash being used around election time. So I've seen studies trying to establish whether in fact it's because of election funding or not. Because after all, cash is much easier to spend and checks are far harder because you have to account for them. But I don't know whether that's a a very clear-cut result, and we can see it again and again in different contexts.
Sir, my second last question would be on technology. You have described so beautifully the huge pluses and also the huge minuses, especially about driving out the middle level, hollowing out the middle is what you have called it. Could you elaborate on how you expect that?
Sorry,
Just
last question.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah,
I told
time's
you
up and we
last
have an
question.
event.
Yeah, last question. On technology, sir, the consequences.
Could you ask the last question again? Sorry.
This
No, the last part of the last question.
You said that it hollows out the
Right.
middle jobs. Where does it put India in?
Well, it's interesting because I think that the point I made about anxiety about jobs. I don't think we're still at the level of automation where these jobs are getting hollowed out. I mean, there's some possibility. Our factories, for example, are getting more automated and they don't employ as many people as they used to. And some people have argued that it may well be that we've missed the bus on sort of assembly, low-skill employment because now those are automated with many more machines and so on. And any factory today, even in India, employs relatively few people for the output it produces. But I think we still have some possibilities of creating jobs, whether in construction, in many of the services, tourism, for example, but also in manufacturing. As we get into manufacturing in a bigger way, once we have the adequate logistics and facilities, I think we will still create jobs. We're still not at the hollowing out point. But we have to keep those dangers in mind and understand that we need to move fast. Otherwise, we will genuinely miss the bus. And then what will be available for us is not those middle-level good jobs in manufacturing, but only much higher level jobs in services and some very real low-level jobs, in manufacturing and services. So we need to work on creating the capabilities to do more of the large-scale manufacturing, build out infrastructure, logistics, etc. But also, in the meantime, work on improving our education so we can get those high-quality jobs and services across the world.
Sir, how about politics? You seem to be more popular than the most popular leaders.
I think you're
now.
popular until you actually enter politics, then you become unpopular. So I think we'll leave it. Well, that's why I have no interest in entering it. Thank you.
You said you have no interest in.
I have no interest in becoming a politician.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank
once
you.
again, congratulations on a wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you.